So today's the 22nd of April 2017 and I'm sitting here with Richard Cavaye in Gordonston in Murray. Richard left Watson's in 1985 but has remained in contact with the school all the time since then, mainly through Scouts and then having your three children go through Watson's. Now Richard is a teacher in Gordonston, teacher of economics, and has been for the last 6 years, and has recently become the new president of the Watsonian Highland and Murray Club. And indeed, just earlier this afternoon, you've arranged your first event here, where you had about 20 Watsonians to be spending the afternoon here and being shown around the school. So, Richard, tell us then about your own experiences at Watson's to begin with. When did you arrive?
Well, I was there from primary one, and I started in primary one in 1972. So I spent the first 2 years, primary one and primary two, with just boys. And in 1974, of course, the girls arrived in the amalgamation. And my memories of primary one and primary two are very vague. I remember that we were in the what is now the upper primary school, and our classroom in primary one was the one nearest the senior school in what is now the upper primary. I mean, you came out of a door that is no longer used, the one that comes out onto Gilsland Road. So primary one and primary two had the lovely Miss Bajinska as my teacher. She's now Mrs. Sanders, or became Mrs. Sanders. And then in primary three, when I was in primary three, the girls arrived. And that was a big change. And looking back, it was quite a sizable change, not just because it went from being a boys' school to being a boys and girls' school, but because the lower primary was being built. And it wasn't ready for the first day of primary three when the girls arrived. So we were all decamped into temporary classrooms all over the place. And my class was in the gym, which is now the library in the upper primary school. And we were in the gym there for, I guess, the first 2 terms, possibly the only first term of primary three. And then we went over to the lower primary once it was ready. And that was a real experience because it was such a modern building for the time. This is the early 70s. And it was like going into the future. It was classrooms with carpets on the floor. I've never seen that before. Tables, as opposed to desks with lids that were screwed down to the ground. The board on the wall was brown. Never seen that before in our lives. And everything was open plan as well. So modern. And looking back, it was way ahead of its time. And it was just so exciting. So by the time we got into the second term of primary three, we'd forgotten what it was like in the old days when it was just the boys. And at 7 years old, of course, 6 months is a lifetime. So it was a very quick transition for us into this new, modern, exciting, new world of co-education.
Yes. And have you been back into the primary building since?
Yeah, when my own kids have been there.
Yeah.
And I tried to find out what my old classroom was, and I couldn't get my bearings at all. I think it's where the nursery is now.
Yes.
I seem to remember, I looked out the window of the nursery, and I seem to remember that view being similar. Of course, it's all changed. It's a long time since we were there.
And then you moved on into the senior school in due course.
Yeah.
And was that a difficult transition or not?
No, and I'll tell you why not. Because of Jim Cowan. Jim Cowan was the head of first year, and he was super. And looking back, I don't think realised how super he was. He knew that us youngsters were going from primary 7 into first year, and it was a big step for us, even though it was just round the corner. He also knew that there was a lot of kids came in from outside the school, and his job was to bring together these 120 or so youngsters. And he did a brilliant job. He made everyone feel so special and so welcome. And he was great. And, you knew where you stood with Jim Cowan, of course. You knew no one stepped out of line, or if they did, they knew they'd stepped out of line. But he was great. And I think he was our year teacher for first and second year. And then he handed over to Roy Mack, another person who was a super pastoral teacher. Yeah. And I've got a little story about Roy Mack a bit later on, if you like.
Oh, you can tell it now.
Tell it now,
Yes,
okay.
go on.
Well, cutting forward to when I was in sixth form.
Yes.
So first year, I loved, Jimmy Cowan was great, really made us feel welcome, third and fourth year. And then when I was in sixth form, I was never the best rugby player in the school. I was usually on the fringes of the second 15, often not in that team. But Roy was the coach of the seconds, and somehow I'd got my way into the second 15. And on one particular day, on one particular match, he dropped me, or he put me on the bench, or he played me out of position. I can't remember what it was. But I don't think it wasn't going to make a big difference to the team because I wasn't the best player. I was very enthusiastic though. Anyway, on the Friday afternoon before the match, I saw Roy coming up the English corridor and I was going down the English corridor. And he came towards me and I said, "Oh, Mr. Mack, can I have a word?" And he could tell, he was obviously going somewhere. He was obviously heading somewhere. And he could tell that I had something on my mind. And I'll never forget this. I mean, Roy could have walked right past me and said, "Well, you're not in the team, forget it." But he didn't. He stopped and he folded his arms like that. And he leant against the wall as if to say, "You've got a problem, I'm listening. I've got all day, tell me what the problem is." And I did, and he listened, and we talked, and we had a super adult conversation about my place in the rugby team or whatever. And I really respected that, and I really got a lot from that. And it's kind of lived with me ever since, because whenever here at Gordonstoun the youngsters come up to me and said, "Sir, I've got a problem," or "I've got an issue," I've always thought of Roy Mack in that time. Yeah. And I've always thought, "No, you've got an issue, I'm here to listen." Because Roy listened to me all those years ago. And I think he still dropped me, and he still kept me in the bench.
I was going to ask, did you get a game?
No. But the fact was he listened. The fact was he listened.
Have you told him this?
I don't think I have, no.
Well, you should.
I will do that.
Well, you'll see this, yes.
Absolutely, but no, that was super.
No,
so Roy and Jimmy Cowan were super schoolmasters.
Yeah.
And really made everyone feel special, whether you were a rugby player, whether you were a musician, a drama, whatever, or whether you just were a decent guy or a decent girl. But they made you feel special.
Both of them giants on the Watson scene.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
What about some other teachers that you remember?
Yeah. I can name three super teachers. Anne Brobble was my history teacher, and Anne was super. Anne was the sort of teacher that didn't just get you through the exam, she enthused about the subject, and she taught me history, and she has given me a lifelong love of history. I've loved history ever since, and I've loved analysing situations and current political situations, and I've always thought of Anne in those times. And also Caroline Fortescue was another one. Caroline Fortescue, who I had her in sixth year for English.
Yes.
And throughout the first, second, third, fourth year, we thought of Caroline as she wasn't the trendiest teacher. She was she was older than most teachers, and we thought, Miss Fortescue, what are we going to do here? But she could recite Shakespeare, and she could read poetry like no one I've ever met before or since. And she had a great sense of humour, and a really colourful life as well. And we had a great time in her class. Super time, Caroline. And the third one I'd like to mention is Liz Smith. She was my economics teacher, and I think we were her first class. She was straight out of teacher training college. Yeah. Or we were her first class at Watson.
Right, she arrived in 1983.
Oh, right, well, that was her. Yeah. We were her first
so
economics
you must
class.
have been in the fifth year when she started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
And she came armed with the latest teaching advancements straight out of college. And she was so enthusiastic. And she taught me how to write an essay, how to construct an essay, not just in economics, but how to write a solid essay that got an argument across. And that's another skill I've used for the rest of my days. So those three teachers were absolutely fantastic, and taught me so much in those days. And
it's good to see that their lessons are continuing with you here as a teacher in Gordonstoun.
Yeah. Whenever I teach my classes, I always think of those teachers and others besides, and think, what would Miss Smith do, or what would Mrs. Brobble do?
They're always looking over your shoulder.
I think they are. I think they are, absolutely.
Yeah. Were there any funny incidents when you were growing up, through school, things that you might... Did you ever get into trouble, for example?
Not into trouble, but one... Well, obviously I did get into trouble, probably. But one incident that does come to mind, and that involves Sir Roger himself. We were the final year when Roger retired, 1985. Of course, so we were his final sixth year.
Yes.
And I... throughout school, a few years before, had gone to the Sixth Form Review. Sixth Form Review was a sort of a play, a comedy, a sketch show that Sixth Form was put on at the end of a term and lampooned the staff and situations in school. Great fun. And I'd seen one a few years before, which was run by a couple of guys who went on to be comedy writers, Jack Docherty, Gordon Kennedy, Murray Hunter. Yeah. They did a review.
That generation.
And they went on to be Absolutely Productions. And their review was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I and a friend of mine said, we want to do this when we get to sixth year. We want to write the review. So we got to sixth year and volunteers were asked for who's going to run the review. And we put our hands up and said, yeah, we'll do that. And we wrote something not nearly as funny as the guys a few years before had. But I do remember that Graham Scott, who's another one I should mention, Graham Scott,
yes.
he was head of sixth year. He called us into his office one day when we were just getting ready for the review. And he said, boys, Sir Roger's retiring this year, and you are expected to lampoon him and to send him up in your review. That's what he expects, and that's what we expect. So please go and make sure that Sir Roger appears in the review quite often.
Yeah.
So we thought, gosh, is he joking here, or is he being serious? He said, no, I'm absolutely serious. This is what you must do. So we wrote him into quite a few sketches in our review. And on the second night, Sir Roger turned up, and we were quite nervous. We're going to be sending him up on stage. Yeah, and all we heard was guffawing like crazy in the front row. Absolutely loved it. And he came backstage afterwards and shook us by the hand. That was fantastic. I loved it.
Yes.
So we didn't know if we were going to be in trouble or if we were...
ringing deep laughter.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He loved it.
And yes. I wonder if there's a record of that review somewhere. Was it?
There was a video taken. I'd love to see that.
It must be in the school archives.
Hopefully, yeah.
Look that out, yeah. And you were involved in scouting.
Yeah,
right from
big
the
part of my life.
Start, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a cub from 8 years old. Mm-hmm. The school has its own scout troop.
Yeah.
And we used to meet on a Friday night in the PE block. And on a Friday night in the PE block, there'd be upwards of 100 youngsters there, Cubs, Scouts, all scouting with the ninth, the school scout troop. And we had great times. We made many friends. And we had the run of the PE block. So we had the open air gym, both gyms, the games hall, the pool if we wanted it. And we were out in the playing fields. And we used the equipment store, which is the Anderson shelter up by the music school.
Yes.
That's where all the scout equipment is kept. And we used to pitch tents on Tipper Linn. We used to light fires or light stoves on Tipper Linn and do all sorts of things on a Friday night and go on camps and weekends. And had great times then. And when I was in fourth year, I was asked if I'd be a young leader to look after the Cub Scouts. The Cub Scouts were 8 years old and I was by then 15, 16. And I was a leader then. And I learned so much about how to teach young people, how to look after young people for a period of time. And I spent a lot of my Friday nights in fourth year and fifth year teaching youngsters how to tie reef knots in the gym there. And that's another skill that's lived with me, not just tying reef knots, but
that's what got you your job here.
Absolutely. Well, it kind of is. I spent a lot of time teaching youngsters skills, which is something that as you say has almost certainly got my job here.
And well after you left school, you were involved in the Scouts at school. That's right.
I left school, went to university, came back, and the Watson Scout troop were looking for a leader. And I volunteered. I did great times in Scouts and came back as a leader. And I was Scout leader from 1991 to 1995, and then again in 2003 till 2011. So I spent a lot of time and always remembering my times in Scouts and seeing these youngsters coming through and enjoying going to the gym block on a Friday night and going on camps, etc.
And even involved when you started working here, you were still involved in Scouts down there? Or?
Down there it was difficult because I'm 200 miles away, so I had to give up my post as Group Scout leader in 2012 because it's just too far away. Yeah. But I've kept my involvement with the Scout movement because I'm now Group Scout leader of the village. The village just outside Gordonston, Hopeman, first Hopeman Scout group. I'm Group Scout leader there.
Yeah,
and
that's quite separate from school.
From school, it is absolutely separate from school. But I'd love to get the two together, the Scouts from Watson's, to come up to a Highland fishing village and see their Scout troop, or the other way around. I think it'd be a great thing to do.
Yeah. Oh, you must do that.
I will do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then after school, university. And then in Aberdeen at Robert Gordon's.
That's right.
Where you did
business studies. Yeah.
And you went into business.
Went into business, and the reason I went into business was again a Watson's connection. When I was in sixth year, didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. Didn't know what I wanted to do. A lot of my friends had unconditional offers to do this or that, or knew exactly what their career was. And it was Sandy Keith, who was my tutor at the time, sat down and said, look, we've got to decide what you want to do. And we talked a wee bit, and he said, what about business? And I said, well, my father's in business. He ran a business in West Savile Terrace in Edinburgh. And he said, well, there you go. Why don't you try business studies? So I went off and looked into various courses, and that's why I went into business studies, and thoroughly enjoyed my time doing that. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and went to work when I graduated in 1989. Went to work in the Borders in Langham, which is Donald Scott's hometown.
Yes.
I remember going to the rugby club and seeing Donald Scott's portrait on the wall.
Yes.
But unfortunately, when I went down there, I learned more about horse racing and playing golf and drinking beer than I did about anything to do with business.
Yeah.
So my career didn't really take off there. So I came back to Edinburgh and joined my father in the family business, and spent 10 years in the family business, learning a great deal in that line of work as well.
And then you decided to go into teaching.
Yeah.
Was that a big decision?
Well, I'd sold the business by that time. Various things had happened to the business. The industry changed. My father died, actually, and I took over the business. And then in 1999, we sold the business, decided that was the best thing to do. And I was
What line of business was it?
We were distributors of catering equipment.
Right,
so we supplied Watson's, actually, the canteen, the bun room, with the plates and glasses and cutlery there.
Yeah.
And
But you sold in 1999.
1999.
Yeah.
And part of my contract with the person who bought the business was that I had to stay out of the business, gardening leave, for a year. So I wasn't allowed to be in business in Edinburgh for a year.
Right.
So I thought, well, gosh, what can I do with myself? And it was my brother-in-law, in fact, who suggested, why don't you go into teaching? And again, it was a kind of like Sandy Keith, it was a light bulb moment. I thought, teaching, yeah. I taught young people in the gym on a Friday night, teaching them knotting, etc. I like working with young people and the scouts, etc. Yeah, teaching sounds good. So I went off to the University of Strathclyde, to Jordan Hill, to train as a business studies teacher. And worked in various schools around about Edinburgh, teaching business. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing was giving a real life perspective. Not only what it said in the textbook, but what happens in your life.
I've done this,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I invited old associates from business in to speak to youngsters and give them a real life feel as well, and set up lots of enterprise activities. One thing that we didn't do when I was at school was young enterprise, which is now a big part of the school.
Oh, yes.
And I think it's a great thing. And I've set up young enterprises in various schools around about Edinburgh and beyond, where we've gone into business, selling, making, creating products, etc. And lots of skills to be learned from that. And that's been part of the way I teach over the past few years.
Yeah. And so then you started working here in Gordonston 6 years ago?
2011, yeah.
I had the impression it was longer ago, but you seem to be so settled here and so on.
Yeah, I love it, yeah.
So, and your job here is what exactly?
Well, I'm a teacher of business studies and economics. We teach the English curriculum, A-levels.
Yes.
And in the A-level curriculum, it's called business studies. In Scotland, it's business management. And that includes accounting and finance, and administration. But in the English curriculum, it's business studies. So I do that. I'm also a year leader. And this is why I have so much respect for Jimmy Cowan and Roy Mack. Because I'm doing the job that they did. I'm the year 9 leader. I'm the guy that
guidance,
does
pastoral work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm the one who gets the youngsters who arrive at Gordonston for their first day in first year, like Jimmy did many years ago. Being a boarding school, that's the biggest part of my job. It's that first week, last week in August usually, when I have youngsters from all over the world arrive here in the north of Scotland. It's usually raining, it's usually cold, and I have to enthuse them and tell them what a great time they're going to have at this school. Yeah. And I'm glad to say it usually works. We have a super time.
Do you stay with year 9? Is it always year 9?
Yeah, it's always year 9. Is that vertical or horizontal?
You don't follow them up?
No. Yeah. My speciality is transition from year 8 to year 9. So I deal with them in the first year in the school. It's 13 or 14 years old.
What role do the housemasters or housemistresses play in that transition?
Yeah, we're all a team. We're all a team. My role is kind of at the centre, if you like. But the housemasters, when youngsters come to Gordonston, they're assigned a house, a boarding house, which for most of them it's where they live, it's their home. So the housemaster or housemistress is a very important person in that young person's life. They're the surrogate parent, really, looking after them. So they've got the biggest role, I would say. with youngsters coming to the school. But I'm a central point where I deal with things as a year group. So I get the whole of year 9 together and say, right, year 9 are doing this, or we're doing that together, or we're doing this for the first time, etc. So we all work as a team, along with the management of the school and along with matrons. Each boarding school, each boarding house has a matron. We've decided, we've often thought of a different word for matron, because matron's a bit sort of hospital connotations of the 1950s. Right, But matrons are super, and we all work together in making sure that the young people who arrive here have a really good experience.
Have you changed the way you do it over the past 2 or 3 years as you've learned the job? Are there things that you see work more, or things that don't work? Yeah,
absolutely. I think in my first couple of years, I've sort of, for me to manage, I've split people into small groups of 5 or 6 or whatever. We have about 60 in our year 9, our first year. So I split them into small groups, and I thought, no, it's much better if we get them all together as a group and be a big happy family. And I always try to do things as a big group of 60. Really difficult for me to manage, but it's better for the youngsters because they can, get on with each other much better together.
Because later on, the kids really identify with the house they're in and so on. You're trying to see them just as a
collegiate
group.
A collegiate group, absolutely. But then it's good that they do identify with their house, because it gives them a bit of a feeling of ownership and a feeling of responsibility.
What you've seen, you've had very close experience now of 2 different schools. Some areas of the schools could cover common ground, but what would you say? What's your judgment on the 2 schools?
I would never judge the 2 schools.
No, judgment. That's a terrible word. Give me some impressions of what you think of Gordonstoun and what you think of Watson's.
I think Gordonstoun and Watson's the same but different, if you like. The same in as much as, if you take, for example, third year projects. We all know third year projects, big part of Watson's, super part of Watson's. Gordonstoun do have a similar ethos that Gordonstoun sees as Watson's does the outdoors as being another classroom. Going on projects isn't just going walking on the hills or going cycling or going canoeing, it's learning about yourself and about the outdoors and about new experiences, which is exactly what Gordonstoun does. In a different way, every year goes on its own third year projects in Gordonstoun, so you'll go on third year projects every year. But for the same purpose. Getting to know yourself, getting to know your colleagues better, getting to know your teachers, the outdoors, new experiences. Exactly the same purpose in doing that, which I love. Also, I've mentioned a few members of staff, the pastoral care that they have. I think a Jim Cowan or a Roy Mack or a Graham Scott would fit in here brilliantly because of the same mould. Same mould that, as I said, a youngster wanting to speak to a teacher, the teacher will fold their arms like Roy did and just say, talk to me. And it's exactly the same sort of pastoral care that goes on here. I think the big thing that's different for the 2 schools for me is at Watson's, a youngster going there will largely mix with other young people from Edinburgh. Most of their friends will be from Edinburgh. Here, we have 41 different nationalities. So a youngster coming here will have friends who are Indian, Chinese, Russian, French, German, Spanish, South African, you name it. A rich diversity of not only nationalities but cultures as well. So they'll have different cultures, different religions that they're mixing with. And here we very specifically and very consciously celebrate Chinese New Year, Diwali, Yom Kippur, all the celebrations from all different cultures. So I think there's a wider diversity, probably, at Gordonstoun than there is at Watson's. But there's a lot of other similarities as well.
You mentioned projects and outdoor education and so on. I should have asked you earlier, what about your own project as a pupil?
Brilliant. 1982, Loch Ossian, with Ian Murray. Just great times. I went back to Loch Ossian for the first time a few years ago. I took my children there, and I got off the train at Carrure and just coming over the hill, and it was just, Loch Ossian is, because I went on project, it's my favourite part of Scotland, bar none. Just fantastic. The project itself was great. We went, and on that project, Ian was a great outdoorsman. And I'm sure we did at least a dozen Munros in 2 weeks, which is more mountains I've climbed in a short period of time than ever before or since.
Yes.
So it was fantastic. One great story about projects was we took canoes with us and we canoed on the loch. And I'm pretty sure, this wouldn't happen now, we went canoeing by ourselves with no supervision. Yeah. We would say to Mr. Barry, "We're just off in the canoes now." And he'd say, "Oh, okay, be careful." And off we would go. And one day, me and a couple of friends canoed down the loch and we saw a dead stag on the shore. And it was cold and it was in the snow. And we thought, "Oh, gosh, right, a bit creepy." Went back into the youth hostel. And we said, "Gosh, you'll never guess what we saw. We saw a dead stag." And Ian Murray and the warden of the hostel, Tom Rigg. Do you remember Tom Rigg? He was there forever. Yes. They said, "Where was this? Show us where it is." And Tom went off to get his saw and a knife. And meanwhile, the whole project, all 14 of us or whatever was on the project, said, "Where is it?" And we went back round to find this dead stag. Tom sawed the antlers off, took its nose off for some reason, and then proceeded to dissect it. I don't want to be too explicit here. And gave us the best biology lesson we could ever have. You know, a biologist sitting dissecting a rat or whatever in a lab is one thing. Directing a stag on the shores of Loch Ossian on projects. Exactly the same lesson, but completely different way of doing it. It was fantastic. We learned all about, mammals. Mammals then. It was great fun.
Did you do the timed run round the loch?
Yes, and my name's on the list.
Oh, are you? Yeah. You're one of them.
59 minutes, 50 seconds.
Oh, 10 seconds to spare.
I think someone stopped the watch just as I could get through.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great honour.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
That's one of the most exclusive clubs in Watsons.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of people who've gone a lot faster than that, though, isn't there?
Yeah, but to have done it in
just
that
did it in that time. Yeah, great fun. I remember running around because there was a day on the project where we didn't climb any hills or go canoeing. We ran around the loch, and everyone had to go for it. That was our rest day, absolutely. Yes. And I think Roger Vanderstein was with us. I think he appeared for that day and ran round. Right. And I did it 59 minutes and 50 seconds. You had to do it in under an hour, of course. Exclusive club.
I'm not sure whether they still go to Ossian, actually.
I really hope they do. I went there, and as I say, it's exactly the same building.
Yeah.
Been done up, and it's got its own wind power generator.
Yes.
Very ecologically friendly. Yeah, super.
One final thing before we stop. It must be said that the name Cavaye, obviously it's very well known in Watsonian circles because of yourself, but also because of Celia Cavaye,
absolutely.
Whom everyone knew and loved. Tell me a little bit about her.
Celia was my second cousin. She was my father's first cousin, so she was my second cousin, and obviously she never married, so she had the name Cavaye. And whenever I went in the school or wherever I go in Edinburgh, people say, Cavaye, you must be musical. And I don't have a musical bone in my body. Celia had all the musical brains in the family, and she was great fun. Delilah, who incidentally is still going. Delilah, when Celia died in 2009, and she left in her will to her friend David, Delilah, the Triumph Stag, 1972.
Yes.
And it was bright red. Yeah. And she had, do you know this? She had a book that she kept in the glove compartment of every service Delilah had, every time she'd filled her with petrol. Oh, really? Every time she'd washed it, I think. Every detail about Delilah. Yeah. Oh. And her friend David was a car enthusiast as well, is a car enthusiast. And he lives in Haddington, and he still has Delilah, still drives Delilah. And I'm sure if he doesn't take care of Delilah in the way that Celia did, he'll be in trouble. Yeah. But Celia was great fun, and she used to love the fact that she was a sixth form tutor, because she was quite a young teacher when she became a sixth form tutor. And she used to tell the story that she went in to see Sir Roger Young, I suppose as she was then, as a 26-year-old, 27-year-old, and said, "I'd like to be a sixth form tutor." And apparently roared with laughter and said, "Don't be ridiculous, why would you be a sixth form tutor?" And then the next day he came and knocked on her door and said, "Actually, you know what? You'd make a good sixth form tutor."
And you know what?
She did. She absolutely did. Yeah. Great fun. She was great fun, and she's sadly missed.
Yeah. So we've covered quite a lot of ground, but we're bound to remember something as soon as we leave now that we haven't covered. But can you think of anything that you'd like to talk about?
I don't think I've mentioned him enough. Is Graham Scott, JG Scott.
JG Scott, yeah.
And JG was head of sixth form.
Yes.
and I'm quite sure he was influenced by Sir Roger. And both their attitudes were that sixth formers should not be treated like children, should be treated like adults, or undergraduates anyway.
Yes.
And my memory of sixth year is that we were treated like adults. And we had a lot of responsibility, a reasonable amount of responsibility. And JG, I don't think, would ever put a sixth former on detention. If any of us broke the rules, which some of us did, he would not allow a teacher to put them on detention. He would say, right, come into my office and we'll discuss how you've broken the rules and we'll discuss how you're not going to do it again. And he treated us like adults. And I think that was a super thing. And I, in my teaching, is another thing that's lived with me. Sixth formers particularly, I treat as much as I can like adults. And I, like to treat them as equals. And in our sixth year, there was a lot of very, very intellectual people who had very, very intellectual conversations on an equal level with a lot of teachers. And there were all the issues of the day were discussed, and we had tutorials, and we were treated as young adults. And I think that is probably what made sixth formers who left Watson's at the time into the people they are now.
Yes, the whole system of TGs, tutorial
groups, absolutely.
Which Graham and Roger worked on so
they
hard.
did.
That was a glory of Watson's.
It absolutely was. It absolutely was. And the responsibility we had for Burns suppers, school dances, prize giving, I guess, and things like that. And we were given a lot of responsibility in those days to do our own thing. We had the sixth form common room, which is still there, I think.
Yes.
And the sixth form library we had as well.
That's not there.
That's not there, yeah. We had responsibility for the sixth form library, and we had to manage that ourselves, which we did. But we were very definitely and very consciously, I think, and conspicuously treated like young adults.
Do you reckon?
I think...
any other areas, please, as we're here and we're seated comfortably.
We are. Absolutely. Well, all I would say to conclude, Rod, is, I'm a teacher at Gordonson. I'm very, very pleased to be here. And I still look back on the people that have influenced me in my teaching, yourself included. And Roy and Jim and Anne and Liz and, all these characters who, and as teachers, I think that we don't realise how much influence we have. Probably Liz Smith, when she was teaching me, didn't realise that 30 years on I was going to be mentioning her. And, possibly some kids that I teach here will,
I'm sure,
in 30 years' time mention.
Yes, they will look back. I'm sure they will,
Great fun.
Okay, Richard.
Well, that's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.